and I think they have made men as minorities. So I congratulate the women who have overtaken the men, and my condolences to the poor men.
Thank you, sir.
Diplomacy has many definitions and many descriptions. There is one which says diplomacy is 50% protocol and 50% alcohol. "50% protocol and 50% alcohol."
One more, sir. Cholesterol as well.
It's you live in the world between Your Excellency and chess. You get, as diplomats, as ambassadors, pampered by these exalted words of Your Excellency, immunities and privileges, and your spirits get elevated by the free flow of duty-free alcohol and cocktail parties. There is another definition. They say, ambassador is an honest person who lies abroad. For his country, of course. So there is a story of an ambassador who was being interviewed by a journalist. So the journalist asked him about his country's domestic politics, foreign policy, views on the United Nations, multilateral issues. After all that, then he asked the ambassador, "Your Excellency, can I also ask you some personal questions, just to give you a human touch to my interview and story?" So the Excellency said, "Yes, go ahead." So the journalist asked, "Your Excellency, do you smoke?" So the Excellency said, "No." Second question, "Do you drink?" He said, "No." "Do you take drugs?" "No." "Do you do etc.?" "No." Then the journalist says, "Come on, no one is perfect in the world. Everyone has some vice, some defect. So what is yours?" So the Excellency looks at him and says, "Sometimes I lie." Sometimes I lie, very small vice, and that too only sometimes. Then there is another description. Diplomat never says no, and the women never say yes. But I don't know what the women diplomats say. Neither yes nor no. Huh? Well, you have to tell me. Apart from the women who never say yes, there is another group which never say yes. And that group includes me. I come from a place in India called Tamil Nadu, in the south. We speak a language called Tamil. And the group is called Tamils, about 70 million of them. The Tamils have a distinct culture. Now, one of the traits of this culture is when you offer them anything, when they visit your house, when you offer something, even if they feel hungry and you offer them food, they will say, "No, no, no." And they don't say no once, they say, "No, no, no, no." Like this. They never say yes. So you have to keep insisting 3-4 times, and then they will say yes. So there is this Tamil who visits the house of an ambassador. So the ambassador offers him, sir, will you have some soft drinks? So the Tamil guy says, no, 3 times. Then after some time the ambassador asks, will you have some fruit juice? No. Then he asks after some time, will you have some beer? No. Then afterwards he asks, will you have some wine? No. Then he asks, will you have some whiskey soda? He says, no soda. Then there is one more description about diplomats, and that is, diplomats think twice before saying nothing. Diplomats think twice before saying nothing. Yeah. Now we come to economic diplomacy. None of these definitions and descriptions I told you work in economic diplomacy. You can't tell lies, you can't think twice and say nothing, you can't say, you can't practice the policy of not saying no. Here you have to talk the language of business. You have to talk with facts and figures, dollars and cents. But maybe I can give another definition of economic diplomacy. Because in economic diplomacy, you deal with money, you deal with rich business people. So there's always a possibility that your exposure to money people might be misinterpreted, misperceived. So you have to be very, very careful and keep an equilibrium. You deal with money people, you receive them, you help them to get contracts, but at the same time, you should not be touched by that money. So I'll give you a definition for that. So I would say economic diplomacy is like tango. You have seen this Argentine dance called tango? How many of you have seen? Okay. Tango is the most sensual dance. Men and women are so close to each other with their bodies and limbs. So they say tango is the art in which you rub the bodies. You have seen tango, they do like this, lots of positions. The art of rubbing the bodies and creating sparks and fireworks, but without getting burnt. So economic diplomacy is to create the fireworks, sparks of prosperity for your country, mutual prosperity for the countries with which you deal, without you getting corrupt, without you getting burnt by the money which you see and deal with. So economic diplomacy is like tango. But there is, for the practitioners of economic diplomacy, there is a problem of attitude, and there is a gap in understanding and perception. There is a kind of deficit. classical diplomats, old diplomats, they look down on business. They think it is below their level to deal with exporters, importers, business people. At least in India, I don't know about your countries. Now it's changing. You know, all diplomats, they like to be in the drawing rooms of the foreign minister, the president, prime minister, where they are welcomed with Your Excellency and cheers. And for them, business is not comfort zone. And then they have this attitude of condensation towards the business people. And that gets reciprocated by the business people too. So the business people, they see you beyond Your Excellency and cheers. They see you for what you are, what you speak, what you know, what knowledge you have, what value you can add to business. So, you need to establish your credibility, that you have knowledge, you have network, you have understanding, you can add value to them. Only then you can be successful in economic diplomacy. But then you will ask me, why? What is this big deal about economic diplomacy? Why do we have to change our attitude and interact with the businessman? Let me tell you. The classical diplomacy, in which political diplomacy is the major part, you will practice only in maximum of 15-20% of the countries with which you deal. Your neighbors, the countries which give you troubles, or the big powers which give you troubles or which can give you favors. Only with these countries you have to go into the full spectrum of politics and practice your political diplomacy. But for the majority of 80% countries, when you are in Africa, when you are in Latin America, most of Europe, they don't care. Now, you say you are from Cambodia, you want to talk about the foreign policy of Cambodia. People in Latin America, it doesn't interest them. Or we from India, we say, you want to talk about the non-alignment. No interest. I don't get audience there. But if you say that, hey, we can add to mutual prosperity. You can do imports from our countries, we have resources, or you can export to our market. Then there is interest. Let me tell you how I used to do in Latin America. In Latin America, I used to spend over 80% of my time and energy in economic diplomacy. That is what got the Latin Americans interested in India. That is what attracted them. So I would talk about the large and growing market of India, 1.2 billion, middle class of 250 million, and how they can export to this growing market. Out of interest. Policymakers, think tanks, business people, chambers of commerce, they would all invite me, please come and tell us more. I would talk to them about how Indian companies invest abroad. For example, you might know that in UK, the largest manufacturing employer is not a British company, it's an Indian company, Tata. Tata Motors has got Jaguar and Land Rover, and they got the Tata Steel, and they got Tata Tea. So their manufacturing business gives more jobs to the British than any British company. Then the Latin Americans get interested. Oh, can we also get some Indian companies? Then I would talk to them about how Indian IT companies have given jobs for 25,000 Latin Americans across the region, from Chile to Mexico. Now, this is more than business. For the young people of Latin America, this is an opportunity to be introduced to the new technology, which is very useful for globalization. And this is useful to them to develop their multicultural skills to deal with clients in Europe and the United States through this Indian company. So they're very interested. So I used to tell the Latin Americans lots of stories. One of the stories I told them was, you might have read this book by Thomas Friedman, The World is Flat, a bit old now. In that book, he tells the story of the American parents. In the olden days, they would tell their kids, son or daughter, you must finish your food, don't waste it. Look at and imagine millions of Indian kids who die of hunger. So don't waste, finish your dinner, don't waste your food. It was in the olden days. But now, the American parents tell their kids at dinner time, son, daughter, finish your homework. If you don't finish, if you don't do well, these Indian kids will take away your jobs. The second story I used to tell them was about the change of paradigm in India. In about 1989-90, the presidents of Brazil, Russia, and the Prime Minister of India sought an appointment with God to seek His help to solve the problems of their countries. So God gave an appointment. So all three reached there. First, the Brazilian president, he told the God, God, we have changed from military dictatorship to democracy. I want to see Brazil as a first world country during my time, because each term of the president is for 5 years. So I want to see this transformation to a first world status during my term of 5 years. So the God looks at him and says, sorry, it is not possible in 5 years. It's going to take about 20 years for Brazil to become a first world. So the Brazilian president starts crying. Then the Russian president, he tells God, God, we have done a historic change from communism to democracy. We want to see Mother Russia as equivalent to United States in every respect. And I want to do this during my term as president. So the God says, sorry, Mr. President, it is not possible during your term. It would take a generation, another 50, 60 years. So the Russian president starts crying. Then it was the turn of the Indian Prime Minister. But before the Indian Prime Minister opened his mouth, the God started crying. The God started crying and said, sorry, Mr. Prime Minister, I know what you are going to ask, but it is not possible during my term. That was in 1989-90, when we were all pessimistic, fatalistic. But in 2013, a guy from TCS, you know TCS, the Tata Consultancy Services, they were number one. IT company. He sends an email to God. God, I want an appointment. God gives. So he goes, and the God says, hey, I told your Prime Minister already that India's problems cannot be solved during my term. So, what do you want? So the guy says, God, I'm not here to ask you for a favor. I'm here to give a proposal to you. What's that? He says, why don't you outsource your work? My company can do it at 1/3 of the cost and more efficient. So this is what attracted Latin Americans towards India. Now, this is economic diplomacy, to highlight the strengths and opportunities of your country to other countries for mutual prosperity, for mutual gain. And this is being effectively practiced by the Chinese diplomats these days. The Chinese ambassadors in Africa, Latin America, Europe, United States, I'm sure in all your countries in ASEAN, they are all welcomed, feted, invited because of the money, the credit, the aid, the business they can offer. Now, let me give you two pieces of advice about practice of economic diplomacy. One, you should use the companies which do business with your country, or your companies which do large business with the countries where you are posted, as your lobbies to achieve your foreign policy and diplomatic goals. It's always useful to make use of these companies because of their money, because of their business, they can influence the local host governments much more effectively and meaningfully than you are saying Your Excellency and how. I'll tell you how I did it in Argentina, where I was ambassador before retirement. I cultivated the group of about 10 companies in Argentina which were exporting soya oil to India. Argentina is the world's largest exporter of soya oil in the world. So it's an important item of export for them. And India was the second largest importer of Argentine soya oil. And China was the largest. But then what happened was in 2009, the Chinese were very unhappy with the Argentines because the Argentines were putting a lot of restrictions on the import of Chinese goods. Okay, they were hitting the local industry. So the Chinese retaliated. They reduced the import of soya oil from Argentina from $2 billion to $200 million. So the Argentines were desperate. They looked for other markets. And it also became a political issue. The opposition blamed the government for mishandling the issue. The president of Argentina, she went to China herself to talk to Chinese leadership. The Chinese looked at her like this and said, no. So the day when she was in Beijing, I called a press conference in Buenos Aires, including the government news agency. I told them, hey guys, don't worry. India will double its imports next year. We will buy more than what China does. But I had done my homework. The previous week, I had spoken to our Importers Association, and they told me that the production of oil seeds in India had gone down, and we needed to import more soya oil next year. But that was the information only I knew. So I used it effectively. So I gave this press conference, and it was splashed across the Argentine media, and the news reached President Cristina and her delegation, and they were delighted. And I got a call from the Minister of Agriculture, who was part of her delegation in Beijing, thanking me, profoundly expressing gratitude. And as soon as the delegation came back to Buenos Aires, the Agriculture Minister came to my office and said, "We are grateful to you." So I made an investment. Then I wanted to use that investment. I wanted to use that lobby. The whole soya industry was very pleased, very happy with the timely statement by us. So I wanted to make use of it. So I thought we should use it to solve any issue we face with the Argentines. Sure, there was an issue. The Argentines had restrictions on import of Indian pharmaceutical products. They would import pharmaceutical raw materials, but they would not allow import of finished products because of the strong domestic pharma lobby. Those companies were making huge profits because the prices were high, and they were afraid that if the Indian pharmaceutical companies enter, the prices would go down and their profit margin would go down. So they put pressure on the Argentine government to put restrictions on the import of Indian pharmaceuticals. I went and talked to the Pharmaceutical Industry Association. They wouldn't care. I wanted a meeting with the health minister. He wouldn't meet me. He refused to meet me. So what do? So I called another press conference and said, our export of pharmaceuticals, if you remove the restrictions, maybe we would export something like about $50–60 million. It's not a big deal for us. India exports $14 billion of pharmaceuticals to the whole world. So your 50–60 million will not matter to India. But if you continue with this restriction, we'll stop the import of soya oil. We'll buy more palm oil from Malaysia, Indonesia. I left it at that. And then the next day, I get a call from the health minister. "Please, can I come to you?" And these soya oil exporters, they all went to the president and said, "You must do something." So the president called our health minister, industry minister, everyone. They had a cabinet meeting and said, "We must do something." And that is economics.